Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. I'm really pleased to have with me tonight two guests, Pepi Acebo and Liza English Kelly, both of whom are people that I know from working on the Asheville primary school fight, and both of them happen to be running for school board here in Asheville. And this is going to be the first elected school board, so it's a very historic occasion. And I'm sorry, I was on Liza the whole time. Let's start that again. Liza, you may want to move over because you're, yeah.
How's that? Now I'm like perfectly framed.
Yeah, I know. I got to move over too. Okay. I'm wondering okay. So anyway, this is Lauren Steiner and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. With me tonight are Pepi Acebo and Liza English Kelly, who are both running for school board here in Asheville. And this is a historic occasion because it's the first time in Asheville City's history that the school board is elected rather than appointed. And this by no means is my attempt to do a comprehensive candidates night. That was already done by a couple of groups a couple of weeks ago, and I will put the link to that in the comments. But really, this is just to have a conversation about education, about Asheville schools, with two people that I happen to know from having worked with them on the Asheville primary school fight. So why don't we start out by having each one of them explain why they're running for school board and what they believe their qualifications to be. And we'll start with you, Pepi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Excellent. My name is Pepi Acebo, so it's Pepi kind of like full of energy. And I am a parent of a fabulous kiddo in the Asheville City School system. Oh, that's her giggling off to the side. We are, I'll just say that we've got a relative who is in surgery out of town. So I'm actually stopped on the way back to Asheville in Columbia for this interview. So it's a little odd location, but I hope you'll bear with me. So I have been a officer of parent-teacher organizations in the Asheville City Schools District for 7 years. For the past 8 years, I've been attending almost every single regular meeting of the school board, work session of the school board, special meeting of the school board, board retreats. Every time they meet and they're in open session, I try to be there in person, and if not, then I'm watching the streams that they've started to do during COVID. So that I know what is going on, so that somebody knows what's going on in each of those meetings and has the historical context and knows when decisions were made and how they affect our different schools. Currently in my life, I make children's blocks for little people. And I've been a camp director and done a bunch of different jobs in my life, ran an ad agency at one point. And right now my primary concern is keeping all of our schools open and getting them fully staffed and meeting the needs of our students. And in order to do that, we need to meet the needs of our staff and our families. So that's why I'm running, is to address those needs.
Great. Okay, now you're up, Liza.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I'm Liza English Kelly. I am a teacher, and I served as an IA at Asheville Primary School for 4 years.
Can you, what is IA?
It's an instructional assistant, it's an assistant teacher. And I know firsthand how hard classified staff work in the district. They're paid hourly and asked to clock out at 37.5 hours a week, lest they go over the 40 hours a week. We were and are some of the hardest workers in the district, often wearing many hats to ensure that the needs of children are met. And just so that everyone's aware, classified staff include instructional assistants, cafeteria workers, custodians, and bus drivers, just so that we're clear on who that encompasses. And I left after last year. I was at Asheville Primary, as I said. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback.
I'm getting some feedback too. Maybe we should, Pepi, you and I should mute ourselves while she's talking.
All right, let's try this. Oh, yes, that fixed it. Oh, I spoke too soon. I'll try to press through.
You know what? It may be your own thing feeding back. Your own. Do you have any other devices on that are playing the show in your room? Or is it just your phone?
It's just my phone.
Because we're getting the feedback of you and me. So it's coming out of a speaker. You have earbuds.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe try them.
Okay, I'll try to take them out. See, did that fix it?
Oh, now I can't hear you at all. But I hear myself. Want to try saying something? Liza, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I think that I fixed it.
I think you did too.
Okay, great. I am not super technologically savvy. So, so I worked as an IA at Asheville Primary School for 4 years. I left after last year. I couldn't take the constant threat of school closure, and I was also offered a position that paid a living wage. So I jumped at that opportunity and also recognized that that gave me the opportunity to advocate for Asheville Primary. Little did I know that it would be the catalyst for deciding to run for school board. Anyway, the reason I decided to run is because I know and believe that school closures are not a long-term fix for budget issues. And our current superintendent has even said that himself. It seems that in recent history, the district has prioritized fiduciary fixes in a very reactive, short-term way. And those have been prioritized over the needs of our students and the needs of staff members who serve the district tirelessly. I am a parent of 2 children who are currently enrolled in the district. One is wrapping up at Asheville Primary just before she begins kindergarten. And she'll be moving to continue with Montessori at the school where I teach next year. And in terms of other qualifications, I'm an out-of-the-box thinker and I'm solutions focused. And in all decision making, we need to center our students, and I'm the right person to do that.
Great. Well, as elected members of the school board, you are going to be responsible to the community as opposed to appointed members who maybe see themselves as just responsible to the elected officials who appointed them. But you are going to have a lot of constituencies that you're responsible to, aside from just the voters. You've got the staff that you were talking about, which is comprised of the teachers and the classified staff. And I would say that both of those categories aren't getting a lot of respect. And that is in terms of not only just what they're being compensated monetarily, but how they're perceived by the community. I've seen over my lifetime respect for teachers and other caregiving positions really diminish over time. And it's very demoralizing. And when you add that to a low salary, you can understand why it's hard to keep a good staff. And then, of course, you have your parents, and parents are taking a lot more interest in their kids, maybe than they used to, getting involved in curricular decisions, sometimes not in the right way. You know, we see the right wing right now with getting involved in critical race theory, which isn't even taught in elementary school, and coming to even our own liberal Asheville School Board complaining about mask mandates. And I'm sure there's also issues with gender affirming curricula. And then your other constituency would be, of course, the students, who are very hurting right now, especially after 2 years of COVID. And also mental health of young people in general has been declining for years. I think suicide has now just replaced car accidents as the leading cause of death of adolescents. So I guess this is a long-winded intro to ask you, as school board members, what is going to be your approach to those various constituencies to try to improve their situation? And whichever one of you wants to talk first can.
I'll go first this time, if you don't mind, Pepi. As someone who serves in the district, I have some existing relationships with members of the community, and I look forward to continuing to expand upon those relationships and deepen the existing relationships that I have. As I have met people through the campaign, I have done my best to convey that I'm truly here to listen, and I want to hear all concerns. We have to center students in every decision-making process. Somehow we've lost focus on them in recent history. And you're absolutely right, Lauren. The mental health needs are at a critical point, and they're not being addressed. We, as parents have gotten more involved in the curricular concerns, we also need to remember that our students attend public school. It's school for everyone. It is made to be accessible to all people, all walks of life, all identities, all manners of neurodivergence, all races of people. And that is part of what makes public education in our country have the potential for greatness. We're not a monochromatic group of people, and our students only serve to gain by being exposed to people who are different from them, and to shift their perspective outside of themselves to develop into empathetic, caring, kind human beings who take care of each other. And that's what I'm here for.
Okay, Pepi, maybe you can, that was a very good, like, macro overview. Maybe you could touch on sort of the specific issues that, I mentioned in my little intro to that question, such as the salaries for the staff, the parents getting involved in the curriculum, and the students' mental health. And you need to unmute. Pepi needs to unmute.
I've got that. That is so many different things. So I'm just going to pick up different threads and run with them. As far as student mental health, right now we have a lot of students who are really struggling with getting back in the building. We are having more more students on edge, more families on edge, more staff on edge, and we're seeing probably, my understanding at this point is that we've got a 4 or 5-fold increase in behavioral incidents compared to pre-COVID. I don't have hard numbers on that, but it really is the sort of situation where we need, in every grade level, in every school, we need a behavioral interventionist or school counselor or support staff person or administrator who can help guide students when they are when they're having a hard day. And we're having a lot more hard days with students. When we are looking at behavioral health, it's not just it is not just the things that we've seen before, but we're having new issues come up because of the amount of time that students were expected to be on computers during remote learning. And it's one of those things where we looked at COVID, we looked at the high mortality rates at the beginning of COVID, and we made some decisions in our district, and many districts made the decision to err on the side of keeping staff and families and children healthy, but it did have a cost in terms of isolation and mental health. And it's going to take us a while to address that, particularly with our middle school age children, but also with our younger ones who seem to be a little bit more resilient. But when we get into the older elementary grades and into middle school, where their social development is so important, we have students who have really suffered during this time. When we talk about what is effective in the classroom as far as staffing, our district pursued a program with ICS, which was a program.
What does that stand for?
Oh goodness, now you've got me on the spot. I'll have to look that up and get that to you. It was a program that came from Wisconsin that was focused on how do we look at what we're doing, look at how systemic racism is baked in, look at how inequities are baked in. And one of the things that it really pushed the district to look at was when we pull kids out for AIG services, when we pull kids out for early literacy support, when we pull kids out accelerated and intellectually gifted, when we pull all the kids out, we have very few kids who are that average kid left in the classroom. So one of the approaches that our teachers noticed in all the demonstration videos was having more than one teacher in each classroom, which is something that they were able to do with the funding that they had in Wisconsin. But with our funding here in North Carolina, it's a real struggle to always have multiple teachers in every classroom able to address the instructional needs of students on multiple levels. And that really is a skill that has to be practiced, and it's not a brand new teacher skill automatically. The other approach that works to address the multiple needs of students in a classroom is that Montessori approach, which has more self-directed learning. So you can have students who are working on different tasks, and sometimes students are reinforcing their own knowledge by teaching other students how to do the tasks. So those are two approaches. The approach from ICS requires much more staffing to execute well. And then we've got the public Montessori approach that was over at Asheville, that is over at Asheville Primary School, that also effectively addresses that And Liza can speak to that as a firsthand teacher in that school, how students that would normally need either special behavioral interventions or an individualized educational plan, an IEP, or are neurodivergent or before those ages where those things get officially diagnosed, that style of classroom is able to meet multiple instructional needs on all sorts of different levels simultaneously. And so when we look at how we're going to meet the needs of the different constituencies in the classroom and the needs of the different families, we have to think about how are we going to fund enough staff to meet students on different needs, and how are we going to provide an environment that takes some of those or all of those Montessori approaches and allows students to serve themselves and to fit into a classroom environment where not every student has all of the same skill levels. So often, the assumption in our district is we can have this one size fits all and we can meet the needs of all the students in the district with the same curriculum being taught at every single school on the elementary level, or every single classroom on the high school level, or every single classroom for a subject on the middle school level. And not all the same approaches work for all the same students. Not all the same students have the same skills. And we have to recognize that our district is porous. We have students moving in and out of our district from Asheville City Schools to Buncombe County Schools, Asheville City Schools to charter schools, to Asheville City Schools to charter schools. And we also have students who are coming into our district having been educated in Hawaii or Texas or Connecticut or anywhere in the country. And so to be able to meet students where they're at, that's a real challenge, and we need to better support our staff with tools and funding so that they can do that.
Okay.
Is that going too much on that one thread?
Yeah, a little bit, because I've got a bunch of other, and I'm getting the feedback again. Pepi, maybe you want to mute. Okay, that's better. Yeah, I want to talk about the funding now because we know that the school has been mismanaged, and we know that the funding has been drying up, and that was one of the reasons excuses, I should say, they gave for trying to shut down Asheville Primary School. And you and I had many conversations about that, Pepi, and you were saying that what they were alleging was not accurate as far as the repairs that they said needed to be made and how much that would cost. But let's just I want to just give you a generic question about funding in general. Okay.
May I jump in? Is that okay?
Well, wait a minute, I'm not
Liza?
done with my feedback.
Okay.
Okay. I imagine that there's a lot of things that need funding. You probably need more school psychologists. You probably need more school nurses. You probably need to pay the teachers more, to pay the classified workers more. So this is going to be a question, your biggest question that you're going to have to grapple with should you be elected to the school board. And that is there enough money out there from the traditional sources of funding? If not, how are you going to get more money? And if you can't get more money, what are your priorities? What are you going to cut so that the more important things will still get funded? And maybe, Liza, you can address that since you haven't talked in a while.
Sure. So I am the first to admit that as a teacher, my focus has not been on sources of funding, but I'm a quick study and I'm paying attention. I think that our district has gotten into this scarcity mindset and has invited leadership that prioritizes reductions in spending. There was just a budget presentation the other day It talked about reducing staff to the tune of $1 million each year over the next 3 years, reducing services, reducing pre-K and shifting it out into the communities, and continuing to consolidate facilities, which means more school closures. One of the county commissioners responded that the answer to budget issues is not to cut things that are critical to our children. We know that pre-K works. We know that it works to close achievement gaps, to reduce the school to prison pipeline, to reduce racial inequity, to boost literacy, and to continue to talk about reducing pre-K when there's an overarching call for universal pre-K in our country to catch up to other countries that are farther ahead of us on that curve. It's just out of the scope of where we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking creatively about how to increase our funding. We need to be including out of district students in enrollment. There seems to be a miscommunication about whether out of district students can enroll. We need to think creatively about the taxes that we generate from tourism, and to ensure that our kids' needs are met in this town that it does such a booming economy in tourism. That's not sustainable, because there are people who live here and who have lived here for decades and generations, and we're not serving them. We continue to lose people to charter schools, to homeschool, to private schooling. And the reasons that that's happening is because we're not able to diversify our education in the elementary schools, in the middle schools, and in the high schools. We need to meet the children where they are, as Pepi was alluding to in his last response. That's one of the beauties of Montessori education, is that children can work at their own pace on what interests them and ensure that they're checking the boxes and they're meeting grade level and exceeding grade level expectations. We have become a district that seems to be disengaged, because we're expecting mediocrity from our students and from our leadership. People have just become able to throw up their hands and say, well, we don't have the funding, so we have to make these cuts. And we have to stop thinking that way. We need to answer the call, and we need to serve our kids and our families and help to lift people out of poverty. And to do that, we also need to lift our staff members out of poverty as well. And yeah, I think that covers it. I could go on and on. You're muted, Lauren.
Lauren, you're muted.
I wish you had said that to me earlier. Okay, but now you have to
Yeah,
mute.
Liza.
No, Pepi, you have to mute. This is like we're the Keystone Cops here. I've never had so many technical problems. I got my dog here, which is why I muted, because I was worried he was going to destroy the couch if I didn't bring him up here. Yeah, say hi, Bernie. Say hi. There's Bernie. Named after Bernie Sanders, of course. Anyway, I was saying that we're 28 minutes into the show, and I've only gotten through a few. I've got, so many more questions. So let's just have bullet point answers from now going forward. I just want to get your feeling, not so much speechifying, as I speechify myself. So give me the bullet points there, Pepi, on the funding. Is there enough funding and it's just being misallocated? Do we need to get more funding? Where are we going to get it from? And you can unmute.
Yeah, I'll jump into that. So our funding, anybody who's not familiar with this should Google Leandro. That's Leandro NC case, and you will see that the state legislature was found to be in violation of the Constitution of the state of North Carolina for underfunding education. And our General Assembly continues to underfund education. And what that means is it puts it on the backs of our county commissioners to pick up the slack, to a lesser extent, our city councils, but really the county commissioners control funds. Right now, last year the county commissioners made a decision because of the steep tax appraisal hikes to keep revenue neutral, which meant that they dropped the tax that was specific for Asheville City Schools, our extra special tax, from 12 cents per $100 to 10 cents per $100. Our current school board is asking for that 2 cents back. For my house, that means an extra $63 a year. And I fully support, even though I don't support some of the steps that the current school board has taken, I am hoping that the county commissioner will provide that funds, which will mean that we'll have 33 million instead of 31 million in the city schools budget for next year, and will not have to make drastic cuts. The long-term plan is we have gone from 4,600 as our student enrollment in Asheville City Schools down to 4,200. We've lost about 500 students in our district in the past 5-6 years, and we need to turn that around. And we're going to turn that around by being a welcoming district, by working with families, by diversifying our educational offerings. These are all things that we can do, and not taking the one-size-fits-all approach. And we will do that by gaining trust of families and of staff, and rebuilding that so that we don't have high teacher and staff turnover. And those are the things that we really need to prioritize, because if we get, instead of cutting $1 million a year, we could add 80 to 100 students and we'd gain $1 million a year in revenue. And so for me, I want to add 80 to 100 students per year for the next 5 years at least. And we have capacity to bring that up to about 5,000 students without building extra buildings. And so we really need to take that approach. And on the flip side, that saves the county from having to build extra buildings. So it actually is a savings for the taxpayers. You're muted, Lauren.
I wanted to talk about some structural issues now regarding the administration, superintendent and the central office, because we've talked privately about corruption, mismanagement, incompetence, bloating, whatever word you want to use. I know that the school board, the superintendent has resigned. It's been told to me by many people that the problems are not going to disappear with his resignation. They are postponing the election or the appointment of a new superintendent, I guess, until after this board is elected, if I'm not mistaken. And I imagine that the school board is not dealing with the central office, even though, as I've been told so many times, the central office really runs the show. So it seems to me that the superintendent choice is going to be really key to fixing the school system. Do either of you want to address how you're going to approach that? Pepi.
So there are things that do need to change with the central office. At this point, because personnel matters are something that if you say something about a staff person as a board member, if you put something out there, then it can be used in a lawsuit to basically get money out of the district that should be going to our students. I'm not going to talk about specific changes that I would work for as far as moving specific people around. I will say that I think it's a positive step that the current school board has said that they will appoint an interim superintendent, and that that interim superintendent will not be somebody who is currently working for the school district. And so I will add also that the current approach to reducing costs at central office are to get rid of staff by attrition. And in effect, what has happened is we've gotten rid of staff by harassment. Not technical legal harassment, but basically, well, maybe technical legal harassment, but please, former staff members, don't sue us. Let us get this situation fixed. We are losing some of our best staff members to this attrition, and we are not necessarily retaining the staff members that we need to be able to move forward with the district positively.
Okay. Liza, do you have anything you'd like to address about the central office or the search for the superintendent? What you think is key there?
I think that one of the key points in looking for a new superintendent is ensuring that whoever comes in is aware of the intricacies of Asheville and is invested in the community. That the person, is willing to take the beat of Asheville and to truly listen to the stakeholders. And Pepi, really, you summed it up all very beautifully. Attrition is not a plan. And losing people because they're unhappy is certainly not a plan. So we have to write the course and, ensure that our stakeholders are being listened to and advocated for. You're muted, Lauren.
Sorry, it's just my dog is sort of whining, and he's not really a whiner, so I'm trying to mute the dog, not so much me. I'd like to talk about equity, closing the achievement gap, the school to prison pipeline, issues that affect students of color. What is the current situation as you both see it, and what is your plan to try to fix it?
Who do you want to start, Lauren?
You can start.
Okay. So we have some folks in central office who have made a career of talking about the racial achievement gap, testing gap, opportunity gap, and they are sometimes they're using valid data, and sometimes they're pointing to the end of grade tests, the end of course tests, which are not really great reflections of our students, because what is reported out is, the students that are above the median are called proficient, and the students below the median are called non-proficient. And when you draw the line between proficient and non-proficient as the average student, what we've gotten in North Carolina is that 1/3 of our white students are automatically labeled non-proficient, even if they're just below that median or they've had a bad day when they walked into the test. And 2/3 of our Black students are labeled as non-proficient. And if we look at systemic racism in the society, if we look at redlining, if we look at economic strain, from racial inequality with intergenerational wealth. If we look at a whole bunch of different factors, um, that idea of who's going to walk into the test and have not the perfect day and be just below that median, there's a racial structural inequity there. What we need to be looking at is more the assessments, which we are starting to do in North Carolina, and helping all of our kids learn and progress. One of the key pieces of this, and some folks think that I'm all about pre-K, and yes, I understand that high schools have needs and middle schools have needs, but that pre-K piece where every child starts kindergarten ready to learn and has the social emotional skills to be productive, effective learning sponges in kindergarten and not be miserable in kindergarten. There is a racial preschool gap, an equity gap in access to quality early childhood education that we've got to address. And that's going to be our foundation for addressing equity in our school district. And of course, we need to continue with every year teacher selected, staff selected trainings in human development, in approaches to discipline that are not ignore to crack down, just where we take middle steps to help students get control of themselves and feel comfortable and safe in the classroom. So we've got things that we can do, things we know how to do, and we need to have an administration that's going to support that.
Now, a lot of this can be handled on this community level. Like you mentioned, I think it was you, Liza, that they were talking about putting pre-K out into the community. I don't know that I have such a problem with that if there's funding for it. I know that my friend who's on the Beverly Hills City Council just proposed that they study offering pre-K, actually childcare, to every single resident of Beverly Hills and every person who works in Beverly Hills. Now, of course, they have a huge budget there. But the point is, if we as a society decide that pre-K is important and childcare is important, then it shouldn't necessarily be put on the school district and on the property taxpayers. And there's a lot of, ARPA money from COVID that maybe could go towards this. I'm not sure if that's where the county commission that is just expanded pre-K in Buncombe County is getting that money from. But there's also the concept of the community school that I first learned about in Los Angeles, where the school is open all day and provides a lot of services for the parents, where you might have ESL classes, you might have after-school care, you might have other things that you could have that makes the school more a resource for the entire community. Wondering if that's something that they do here in Asheville, if it's something that you guys would support if you were elected, to have maybe the community as a whole. And that also is something I've been discussing with the city council candidates and the mayor candidates, is about Asheville is not affordable. So one thing is to raise the wages, but the other thing is also to provide more services that they're currently paying for. So what is your thinking about that? And we could start with you, Liza.
So I think that that was a lot of information in the lead up, Lauren. But one thing that I don't want to gloss over about the achievement gap in Asheville and in North Carolina, and it's the worst in the state, is the fact that it mirrors the higher rate of disciplinary referrals that Black and Brown students receive. And if a child is being sent out of the classroom, that child is not developing a relationship with their peers. It's not, that child is not developing a relationship with their teachers. Their self-esteem is suffering, and their abilities to maintain relationships is suffering. And that's something that we need to take into account when we talk about the achievement gap. It's an access gap, and it's being perpetuated. And now to address your next question.
Yes, that's what I was alluding to when I was talking about the school to prison pipeline, which is the more punitive disciplinary measures that are meted out to African American students.
Mm-hmm. So as far as pushing pre-K out into communities, while it's a nice idea in practice, I think that, or in theory, I think in practice, it ignores the wishes of Black and brown families who predominantly are the population in housing authority neighborhoods. The families with whom I have relationships, when that proposal was made last year, said how glad that their kids were not going to be stuck in the neighborhood, because the neighborhoods where they're living have a higher crime rate, and there's gang violence, and our students need to intermingle with people who don't look like them and who learn differently from them to be contributing members of society. Now, we need to also address ways to lift people out of poverty in Asheville, but further secluding people into racially divided communities is not the answer. You're muted, Lauren.
I totally agree with that. And, one of the things that I was thinking of when I asked the question about closing the achievement gap is that the year that the achievement gap was lowest was 1988, and that was the height of busing. So integration, and this is the work of Hannah Nicole Jones, right? That's Hannah Nicole Jones, yeah. Her whole work for her MacArthur Genius Grant was based on that integration is the major way to reduce the achievement gap. So I don't know how much appetite there is for integration in the Black community these days. I know shows that I've done with school board candidates in California, they're really not so into that because they were being, bussed out of their neighborhoods for like an hour on a bus. And they wanted to, like, why don't we bus some white kids into here was sort of the idea. And now they're just into what their version of community schools is, fully funded community schools in the inner city, which is still very segregated. So that's kind of a big problem. And we know that charter schools increase segregation. I wanted to talk a little bit about curriculum and certain things that when I was a parent, I was looking for progressive education. And when I thought of progressive, I meant developmental, not pushing a kid to read too early, project-based, experiential education that's relevant to their lives. I was always pushing a return to civics because I think children need to be educated not just to be competent workers in a capitalist society, but informed citizens of a democracy. And I interviewed some high school students in California at the March for Our Lives, and she pronounced the word Senate. And it took me a while, and I realized she was talking about the Senate. She had never heard that word said. This was an African-American girl that was interested enough to go to the March for Our Lives, but nobody had ever said the word Senate around her. She didn't even know who her senators were. So, over the years, I've seen testing. First, we had Bush and his, No Child Left Behind. Then we had Obama and his Race to the Top, where they were actually incentivizing teachers and school districts to get grades to the point where teachers were cheating so that they could get this money. What is the state of the curriculum in the Asheville schools as far as those progressive qualities that I delineated? Do you think it's adequate? Would you want it to be more progressive? What is your thinking on the curriculum in general? Let me start with you, Pepi.
I do want to clarify that we have Black children, white children, children of all colors in our schools who maybe haven't heard certain language, and that's not, and that we don't have just one Black community in Asheville. We have many different Black communities in Asheville, and we have leaders from different Black communities who are advocating for sometimes the same thing and sometimes for different or contradictory approaches. And I'll also say that because of the porousness between our charter schools and our public schools, and historically we have a bunch of kids who leave for middle school and come back for high school. We need to, we don't want to undermine the charter schools, but I do understand that we lose that per pupil funding, and we have opportunities to address that. On the middle school level, if we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about expanding enrollment, we have Asheville Middle School, and we have Montford North Star Academy. I've served as president or co-president of Montford North Star Academy's PTO for the past 3 years. Asheville Middle School also has fantastic teachers, but it is not a fully enrolled school, but it has 3 times the capacity of Montford North Star Academy. And it has just under 1/3 of its space. It's using about a little bit more than 2/3 of its space. So we've got folks in central office who are talking about merging those together and having everybody do the same curriculum. And my concern with that is that we will lose another 100, 200 students and lose, because we get about $1 million for every 80 to 100 students, that's further going to drive us down into a hole. So instead of taking that approach, Asheville Middle School could have 3 themed schools within a school, and it's actually set up with pods so that every grade level has 3 different pods, and each pod can accommodate 80 to 100 students. So we really could be innovative in that school, just like Montford North Star Academy is innovative. Right now in the city of Asheville, all of our schools are magnet schools, and they all have themes, but our central office and our board doesn't do a lot to support those themes, and it's primarily the initiative of the staff, supported by some funding from the Asheville City Schools Foundation, and more so from, at times, our parent-teacher organizations, that makes that a reality. As far as specific curriculum, we adopted district-wide a beta curriculum that was modeled after another curriculum for early literacy, and it has shown improvements. But I think that there's a lot more that we can do to build on the improvements that we've seen from foundations, and have something that's more engaging for the students on different levels.
Yeah.
Do you want me to keep talking or give Liza a turn?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Liza, you need to mute, your opinion on the qualities that I was talking about as far as progressive education, that it's developmental, that you're not forcing kids to read too early before they're ready, that it's experiential, that you're not just teaching kids, like school that my son looked at, they were teaching about metamorphosis. They were holding up a chart that was exactly the same chart I swear I remember from the 60s versus the school that he eventually went to, which was progressive, and they actually had caterpillars in the classroom and they watched them turn into butterflies. You know, the civics component that I was talking about yesterday, for example, I was covering the Starbucks rally. They're unionizing. They had a vote today. I've got to find out how that went. At the Charlotte Street store, and there was a middle school teacher from a private school, it was called the Odyssey School, who brought his entire class. And he was saying, this is sort of a school without walls. And so I said, well, how engaged are these kids? Have they been asking you questions as you've been standing here? And he said, you know how kids are in middle school. They're really, I forget the adjectives he used, but it was basic. They were indifferent at best and bored at whatever worst, something. And I was talking to him about this Project Citizen thing where the kids, and they do this all over in the country. It's the Center for Civic Education in Calabasas. It's called Project Citizen. The kids decide a problem in their community. Say there are too many near misses at a corner and kids are almost getting hit by cars. So the kids democratically decide what problem in their community they want to solve. Then they research what is the appropriate government agency, city, state, or federal, that would deal with that problem. Then how are they going to make a presentation, come up with all their facts and statistics, and present to that body? And I was thinking, you know, me being an activist and everything, oh, this is so exciting. I wish they had this when I was in school. But anything to engage kids. So your general thoughts on the curriculum, what kinds of things? Do you think the curriculum is progressive enough to even kids engagement? What would you like?
I want to jump in and say that what the things you're describing are things that are going on in Asheville City Schools in our classrooms. Our classrooms are not the problem.
Okay, I gotcha. All right, there were a couple of other things that I mentioned. You were talking about magnet schools. I think one of you referred to gifted students the other a little while ago. I know my physical therapist was telling me that she has a child who is very quick learner, and she was being taken out of the classroom, and you know, she wanted her taken out of the classroom, and she was speaking about a school board candidate who she knows, and I won't mention the name, but when she mentioned this gifted program to her, she kind of rolled her eyes and said she's not in favor of that. I understand, you know, because the point you were making earlier about taking kids out of the classroom, there's not that many average kids left. But what do you suggest happen for gifted students, aside from maybe having, as Pepi said, teachers in there? You know, some of the things that I've heard in the past are multi-age classrooms. Like I know where my son went to school, they had a 3-4 classroom put together.
I think that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just think that, you know, across the board, I think, you know, to address your question about curriculum, Lauren, and to also piggyback onto this one is I think that we need to raise the bar for our kids. I think it's too low. I think that we can get caught up teaching to the test, and those standards are too low. Our kids are so incredibly capable, and to work as teachers to engage them in meaningful ways, they're going to get the content. They're going to be able to check those boxes. They will learn to read if you make it an interesting and engaging process that's, you know, transformative, because that's what it is. Reading is magical. It opens up an entire world ahead of them. But if a district gets caught up in, you know, a universal curriculum across all the elementary schools without any diversification, then our kids are going to just remain disengaged, and we're just going to perpetuate the achievement gaps.
Pepi, did you want to add something about the curriculum? Or gifted students?
Well, so what our district did in response to the ICS process, which, you know, we paid money for, and then it was abandoned because the next superintendent didn't invent it, which happens a lot in our district. It's the I didn't invent it and I want something with my name on it. But what came out of that ICS process for accelerated and intellectually gifted students, they're identified under state law at the end of second grade, and those services are available starting in third grade. Well, what our AIG staff did under Marty Sullivan, who is another professional who left the district this year, under Marty Sullivan's guidance, working with Shane Cassida, who was assistant superintendent, they created a process where there were multiple pathways to being AIG identified, and that was by subgroup and by teacher recommendation, by student interest, by samples of student work, instead of just in the 90th percentile or above on a standardized test, which is the more typical route. Additionally, the AIG staff pushed AIG enrichment into every classroom. At least that was the plan pre-COVID. And so you had AIG type materials, so things that students could get multiple levels of experience and thinking about problem solving in different ways. At the kindergarten level, at the first grade level, at the second grade level. And so our AIG teachers became problem solving and project-based learning teaching coaches for all of our staff. And it was a very promising, effective model. And it's something that I'm hoping that we'll continue with. And so pulling students out is not the only way to approach accelerated and intellectually gifted students.
Okay, and I guess my final question, and believe it or not, we've gone through everything, is the trend that we've seen over the years to make every student college ready, when not every student is destined for college. And there used to be, I remember when I was young, there used to be home economics that the girls would take and shop that the boys would take. And a lot of these sort of pre-trade schooly type classes that, they became out of fashion, and it was all about everybody should go to college. And I don't think everybody should go to college. And with all these people going to college and getting in all this student debt, they're not even finding jobs in their fields, and they're all working at, Starbucks as baristas, and now they're organizing the Starbucks. So I guess that's a good thing to do. But what is the situation in Asheville District Schools regarding that kind of, is that the same mentality that's been here? Because I know you have AB Tech, which is a great option. What is the situation as far as the idea about pushing everybody to go to college, or is it just whatever the kid wants to do or the family wants to do?
Liza, do you want me to jump in on that? Yeah, so I had the pleasure of touring the career and technical education program at Asheville High SILSA on Monday. There is a lot that they're offering, and they've got a vision for growing a program that has high school students career ready and things that they can then build on, and working in partnership with AB Tech, which is just adjacent to the campus. It's a lot of promising approaches, and I'm very supportive of the vision that Justin Polizzi and Dr. Cheeks and Cody Cheek, the two are not the same, Dr. Cheeks and Cody Cheek, the vision that they've got for growing that program. culinary program, agricultural program, um, uh, hair and aesthetics, programs that normally you have to pay, you have to get in debt for. They're offering them through the high school. So you don't have to go do beauty school and take out a $15,000 loan. You don't have to go to culinary school and take out, you know, $30,000 to $60,000. So you may choose that as a different step, as a next step. So we've got some really promising programs at Asheville High School and SILSA, and those programs are available to students of both those high schools.
Okay, I guess there was one more question that I forgot to ask, and that was about special needs students. Because my son was on an IEP, and he actually, the school that he was at gave him more accommodations than I even knew what to ask for. And I was told that so many people had to file grievance procedures with their schools, but my son was, I guess, just very lucky that he had a very good, you know, resource person that told us about all these different things that were available. What is your feeling about the state of special education at the district? Is it adequate? What would you do differently? And we could start with you, Liza.
I think that, you know, I can speak to an inclusive classroom that I worked in inclusive classroom environments at Asheville Primary, and it was very successful. I think that, you know, what you mentioned about your son is that, you know, every child with an IEP or with a learning difference needs to have at least one advocate that's going to fight for them, and that can be their parent, it could be their teacher, it could be an administrator, but to ensure that, you know, that student's needs are met, and that student has access to a quality education and every service that they're entitled to. You know, there's always a need for expansion of special needs in our schools, and, you know, ensuring that our schools are fully staffed is the first step to addressing that.
Pepi, do you have any additional comments?
From what I have seen, we have done a good job at times, and then for certain students, we drop the ball. And it is a staffing issue. And again, the approach of public Montessori of meeting students on multiple levels where they're at, without, essentially every student has an individualized educational plan under Montessori, and they don't have to fight for it. And so even the person who advocated repeatedly for closing Asheville Primary School said at a recent board meeting that maybe we should bring some of those Montessori ideas that the parents like, I'm using the air quotes, that we should bring those to our schools. And even though we disagree often, I disagree with that board member often, we do agree on that we need to bring more of that approach so that we can meet all the students where they're at.
Okay.
We do have an exceptional developmental day program on the preschool level, and I'm very concerned that that's at risk in the current environment. Asheville City Preschool Program that the school district has run for 30 years has been a regional model for how to do it best, with a mix of Head Start, NC Pre-K, and private pay, and with interventionists for special needs in the building. Their offices are downstairs in the same building, so they just come upstairs and help out, and then there's special classrooms. I really don't want us to lose this gem of a school. And I think that there's a lot of things that have been going on in that building that have also been going on in other buildings to the benefit of other students. And we don't hear enough about all that wonderful stuff because we're trying to protect the educational records privacies of students and families. And so you don't hear all the success stories that are happening in the classrooms.
Okay, so final question, you might want to mute. Talk about this election that's currently happening. I mean, we're seeing this as a primary election as far as the other offices go. But for the school board, is this the final election? I mean, how many candidates are there? How many can you vote for? How many will be elected? Is there another election in November? I'm just a little bit confused about that. Liza?
So the primary, there are currently 9 candidates on the ballot for the primary, but one has removed themselves from the election, from the campaign. And
Who is that, just so people know who might be voting?
Sarah Shea has removed herself. But
She's still on the ballot. So if she gets more votes than another candidate, then that other candidate would be bumped off. But she's not planning on continuing to the general election because she's having to relocate because of our housing crisis here in Asheville.
but there are 4 seats up for election in November.
Okay, so, but you only vote for 3 this time, right?
4.
You vote for 4, okay. All right, well, you two are very qualified, very passionate about education. I think viewers could not go wrong in voting for you, but you know what? There's other candidates out there and everybody needs to, listen to what they have to say. And as I said, I will put that forum into the comments, but I wish you great luck. And thank you very much for joining me on the show tonight. And viewers, if you found this show helpful, please share it. My next show is going to be tomorrow. Seems like I'm doing shows every day this week with Linda Seeley from Mothers for Peace, which is an organization in Northern California. And it's going to be about the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which there was an agreement by the governor that it would be closed down. We already closed down the San Onofre nuclear power plant. And now, since this war in Ukraine, they're saying they need the power. So there's an urgency to try to get the Governor Newsom, that is, to stick with his commitment to close this nuclear power plant down. And I'm going to be doing that show tomorrow. And it'll be 9 p.m. Pacific time so that it could be 6 p.m. California time. And then I think I'm doing a show Sunday, but quite frankly, I forgot what it's about. So I'm just overshowed. I think I'm gonna have to take this election. I'm gonna have to take a week off. But thank you guys very much, and make sure everybody that you go out and vote. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.